The 2001 Honda S2000, the 7th of 20 Hondas I've owned in my life. I picked up this S2000 brand new in September of 2000. Honda announced that the rare spa yellow color would be released in 2001. As a dumb kid back then, I had to have one over my silver 2000 S2000. However, as I've stated several times now in this series, once again Honda's inherent resale value is how I was able to own 20 Hondas in 35 years. In this case, I bought both the 2000 and 2001 S2000 for MSRP at $32,000 with a $5,000 markup to make it $37,000. My dealer gave me $34,000 for the trade-in, so I ended up driving the 2000 for a year and paying $3,000 to do so. That came out to about $250 a month, which was half the price of my actual car payment at the time. It's important to note that at least in my US region, I saw S2000s listed at $5,000 over MSRP at least up until the AP2 came out in 2004. I kept the good old 88 Civic DX hatch as my daily driver, and this S2000 never saw rain. Nothing was really different on the 2001 S2000 over the 2000, just a new color. It still had the 2.0-liter dual overhead cam VTEC F20 C1 engine with a 9,000 RPM redline, and the performance numbers didn't change. But Honda had made stealth changes to address some suspension quote-unquote issues. For a year now, there had been talk about the snap oversteer issue. The rear end, when pushed really hard, might snap loose and lead to a spinout. The word was out that there was an abnormally high amount of accidents and insurance was going up. To address this issue in the 2001 model, while not altering mechanical components of the suspension, Honda definitely tweaked the suspension. From the seat of my pants, I felt a clear difference. As I talked about in the previous episode, my 2000 S2000 was super stiff. I felt it the most at night with the HID lights flashing up at other drivers. This was gone in 2001, and while I never had any handling issues in the 2000 S2000, the 2001 felt more planted on the road while still being pretty harsh like you'd expect in a sports roadster. You want my honest opinion on this subject? The 2000 S2000 had a true hardcore setup. The kids were buying them who were used to low horsepower front-wheel drive Hondas. They didn't respect the car's performance, pushed it too hard, and wrapped it around light poles. Yep, I blame the drivers. To this day, I would prefer the beast mode of that 2000 S2000. These changes still worked out for me since this S2000 is the one I tracked and autocrossed, and its handling was as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. So, I took my 2001 S2000 to my first ever track day at the Portland International Raceway on a Porsche driver's track day. Even though by this time there had been 5,000 S2000s in the USA, mine was the first most people at these events had ever seen. I was allowed to go into the intermediate category, however, since it was my first time, I was required to have a drive instructor with me. My instructor was an old grizzled racer, probably 70 years old. He literally raced a kart on the track during the race category time slots. He told me that he had trained Porsche drivers at these events for 40 years, and this was the first S2000 that he'd ever heard of and knew nothing about it. So we were off, and oh man, the S2000 on the track is absolutely graceful, and I even hit 135 miles an hour on the straight with the top off. I took the instructor's advice, but felt like the S2000 allowed me to just drive like it should naturally on a track. The instructor's main criticism that he kept yelling at me, over the air noise of the S2000 on the track with its top down doing over 80 in a corner, was that I was shifting too late and keeping my RPMs too high. So in between runs we had a broader discussion. I explained to him that the S2000 had no power under 6,000 RPMs when VTEC kicked in. On corners, I would shift to a gear that kept me above 6,000 RPMs so I could power through it. He wouldn't listen to me, so I agreed to let him drive it in the next 15-minute session. In the first couple straights, the guy, maybe thinking it was a Porsche with torque and low-end grunt, was shifting the thing at like 4,000 RPMs. I could literally hear the engine just bogging out as he tried to accelerate at 3,000 RPMs. So I yelled at him and reminded him about keeping the RPMs up, and the dude switched on a dime. He jumped the RPMs into VTEC and then just started carving up the corners. I kid you not, when we finished, he got out of the S2000 and absolutely slobbered on it, saying, and I quote exactly, "I've been racing Porsche cars here for 50 years, and I have never felt a car like this on the track. It feels like a motorcycle." The guy just kept gushing out with enthusiasm like he was a teenager again. That is what it was like owning an S2000 in the year 2000. And by the way, I got 8 miles per gallon and burned 3/4 a tank of gas, as well as burning half the rubber off the new tires that day. I took the 2001 Honda S2000 to a second Porsche track day with one of my managers at work who had a brand new 2,400 horsepower BMW M5. You know, back when we'd poo our pants at this thing being an absolutely unheard of 400 horsepower at the time. Since it was my second track day, I didn't have to have an instructor this time, so it was just me. I also met a guy there who was tracking his 1991 Acura NSX, which had a full Comtech setup minus the supercharger. He had not been in an S2000, so we drove each other as passengers on one of the 15-minute sessions. It's amazingly different being the driver versus passenger on a track because I felt like I'd done 1,000 sit-ups after that NSX run. He liked the S2000 so much that he said he was going to buy one, and I believe he actually did down the road. I took my 2001 Honda S2000 to a third track day with the Porsche Club. This time with a coworker who actually owned a Porsche. I kid you not, this guy actually used to race sport bikes at Portland International Raceway. He brought his 1988 Porsche 911 Turbo. Yep, red, just like you imagine that fine machine would be. We were both in an intermediate group, and while you're not supposed to actually race at these events, him and I went toe-to-toe after each other in multiple sessions. I started out in front, but I let him pass me mid-session because his Porsche would always pull ahead of me on straights, and that was the only place we could pass. But every time we hit a corner, I always caught up to him and rode his butt. Amazing times. The adrenaline released racing on the track proved to my younger self that we didn't need drugs to have this kind of feeling. These experiences also ended my youthful dumb and dangerous behavior when street driving. The experiences on the track were much less dangerous than driving on bad roads around bad drivers. My future speeding ticket count dropped significantly. I also autocrossed the 2001 Honda S2000 a few times, but never got any pictures. I did get some of some future cars autocrossing. Unfortunately, I only got to drive this S2000 for a year since my life took over and we were going to have our second child, and moving them around in the Civic hatch was not going to work. I had to move into something more adult, which we'll talk about in the future episodes. Although several years later, I was in a much better position to actually get a third S2000. Please help my channel, like and subscribe, and check out these similar videos.